I wasn't going to do any more of these weekly UK Health Agency reports because at this point in time they're pretty much saying the same thing week on, week out. However, having decided not to do any more, I checked the latest one and found a good reason to do one more, which is absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the data, so I'm going to do it. On a brief side note, you might have noticed the lack of any whirring, clicking and buzzing noises in the background. This is on account of a reasonable camera upgrade, technological advancements such as which my Subscribestar is quite useful in supporting, and you can assist if you would like to for a reasonably modest monthly amount. And less modest amounts are also options, it would be remiss not to point out. The Sony Handycam had to be retired on account of new DVDs. Although they are available, they no longer work on the old hardware, so I've had to retire it. Back in mid-November we had been used to seeing things like this. This is not startling, even if I highlight that section, which is those who have not partaken of the nectar, you wouldn't notice anything remarkable. This is because there is nothing remarkable. However, it did subsequently become remarkable. That's that one, week 46. What happens next week? It's all greyed out. Week 46, then week 47. The only conceivable reason for which they could have started doing that was as a distraction tactic. I would imagine they employed some behavioural science unit and they would have come up with the brilliant idea of greying the uncomfortable section out, and that way the proles won't notice it anymore. And so it went on. Week 48, week 49, week 50, week 51. Week 1 this year, that was a bad week for the Juicy crew. Bad numbers. Week 2, that was pretty bad for the faithful as well. Week 3 and week 4. You'd think somebody would have told them, this isn't fooling anybody. If anything, you're highlighting that section, you're drawing attention to it by so obviously trying to cover it up. And evidently at some point, something did change, and quite recently. That's that last one again, going on to the latest week, week 5. Hallelujah, they've stopped greying it out. They've put everything back now in the same typeface. That was a transparent deflection attempt which didn't fool anyone, but they thought it might. It was a con trick. Credit to them, of course, for putting all this nectar negative data out there in the first place at all. But this was an infantile trick to try to cover up what the data says. It says an awful lot about the culture of deception surrounding this whole thing. Could you imagine 2 years ago serious professional people saying, well, maybe if we start to rub out this data they might not notice it? It's hard to imagine that would have happened 2 years ago. And this here is what they had been trying to cover up until this week. This is last week, that's the atheists, and that's the faithful. Moving on to this week, that's the heretics, that's the part they play in the whole, that is they in whom the nectar freely flows, and that is the proportion they represent. So this number has actually increased a bit again since last week. Are you getting that? That's the number, and that's the faithful in whom the juice is freely flowing. But at least they're not trying to dissuade people from seeing it anymore. Let's be grateful that we've seen the end of this rubbed out nonsense, and how they try to pull the wool over the eyes of the viewing public. All that is a perfect microcosm for the data manipulation, the deception games that governments have been playing absolutely everywhere.